My name is Jessica Merchant, and today I am going to perform a policy analysis on the Right to Try Act. But first, I want to discuss the factors influencing policy development and implementation in the clinical setting. Cost should always be considered when developing or changing a policy. Questions should be addressed such as, are the funds available? How can they be made available? Is the change going to be worth the cost? Another important factor that should be addressed in policymaking and implementation is identifying who will be affected by the policy and ensuring that its implementation will be fair to all populations involved. Stakeholder involvement is an important aspect of policymaking as well, to ensure that their interests are being met and also that they will be proactive in implementing the policy. These stakeholders are individuals directly involved in the implementation of the policy and may be able to offer information already known about solutions that have or have not worked in the past, as well as resources available to ensure implementation will be successful. It is important to ask, how can this policy encompass the concerns of all stakeholders? It is also important to consider whether the policy is ethical by carefully weighing the legality and morality. Which policy will do the most good and the least harm? Today, we're going to discuss the 115th Congress First Session Right to Try Act of 2017. This act authorizes terminally ill patients to use medications that are not yet approved for use in the public. The problem statement is, does the removal of FDA approval of experimental drugs being administered to terminally ill patients improve the process for these individuals or pose an increased overall risk? A little background to the policy includes that the Right to Try Act is in place in 38 states, including North Carolina. This allows terminally ill patients in these states to have access to clinical trial drugs. However, until the Right to Try Act becomes a federal bill approved by the Senate, residents in the remaining states will not have this access. The previous steps involved for terminally ill patients to obtain experimental drug treatments included the following: agreement from a licensed doctor to implement the therapy, agreement from the drug company to utilize the therapy, clearance from the FDA to initiate the therapy, institutional board approval for implementation of the therapy, and patient consent as well as financial responsibility for the treatment. Pharmaceutical companies, however, often do waive payment for trial medications. Although terminally ill patients have had access to experimental drug treatments in the past, this act specifically eliminates the step involving clearance by the FDA. The FDA has approved 99.5% of the requests in the past and has played a very minor role in the approval of experimental therapies previously. Therefore, their removal from this process is minimally useful, aside from the additional paperwork and time involved in utilizing them. In addition, these patients are offered clinical trial drugs with the exception of being involved in the clinical trials. This could potentially weaken clinical research by limiting data collection. In the future, this could be detrimental to public health, as clinical trials are crucial in development of new drug treatments. Although these patients are not included in clinical trials, they are still monitored by researchers for adverse effects, which can further compromise the time of these researchers without any resulting benefits. Elimination of the FDA approval could also lead to a negative financial incentive for pharmaceutical companies to target these populations without the oversight of the FDA. This analysis is necessary to provide potential risks involved with elimination of the FDA approval in a terminally ill patient's ability to obtain experimental drugs. Key stakeholders include the terminally ill patients, physicians, pharmaceutical companies, the IRB, as well as the FDA. Both Republicans and Democrats supported this bill. However, physicians and drug companies claim that it is not in the best interest of the public and are opposing it. These physicians, as well as the drug industry, are showing interest in changing this policy due to the risk involved with inhibiting clinical research, as well as the risk to patient safety, despite their terminal illness. There is also discussion about its effects on the use of palliative care. It is important to act now in order to prevent the inhibition of clinical research, as well as prevent any undue patient harm due to lack of FDA involvement. Quality of care is an important factor to address. It is thought that by enabling this act, we are promoting quality of care for terminally ill patients seeking any effort to survive. However, this law is ethically questionable because it is rare that these therapies are actually effective, and often implementing these therapies can cause further harm. It is important for these patients to understand the benefits of palliative care and end-of-life comfort, as well as have realistic expectations of clinical trial drugs. The use of these clinical trial drugs for terminally ill patients poses many fairness issues. Frequently, when drug companies develop a new drug for clinical trial, there is only a limited amount of it. This limited stock is used primarily in the clinical trials to try and advance the medication to its eventual release to the public. By releasing these drugs early to patients that may not even be candidates for the treatment, can hugely affect the advancement of the drug trial. This can delay the process and inhibit the public from eventual use of that drug. Drug companies often do not charge these patients for trial drugs, causing financial burden on the development of the drug. However, on occasion, the patient is required to pay out of pocket for the medication, which may actually cause them more harm than good. Lack of FDA involvement leaves physicians very little information about the clinical trial drug, including dosing and side effects. It also gives drug companies the ability to market unregulated experimental medications to patients. This can lead to legal concerns in the future. The following are 3 options to change the Right to Try Act to ensure patient safety and quality of care, as well as cost effectiveness and maximize public benefit. The first option involves allowance of these terminally ill patients to become involved in the clinical trial process. This benefits the patient and the public by providing feedback from the treatment on effectiveness, adverse effects, etc. This would also eliminate risks of experimental drug release directly to the patients by allowing the FDA to stay involved. Negative aspects of this change include potentially skewed data from clinical trials due to the patient's terminal illness. Additionally, this change could increase costs for the drug company to administer medications to these individuals that may not meet exact criteria for their study. Another option, or option 2, would be to create a fast-track method of processing patient requests for FDA approval. This modification would not benefit the drug trial process. However, it would protect the patient by making the FDA involved once again, as well as eliminating the current time-consuming process of obtaining approval. This would be a low-cost solution. The forms involved in requesting approval have been shortened in the past, but could once again be shortened and made easier to complete. Additionally, the FDA would be given time parameters by which they would have to complete these requests. This would increase efficiency of the process. This would also improve quality of care by eliminating the time-consuming aspect of this process. It would also improve patient safety and provide doctors with crucial information about the trial drugs before administration by allowing the FDA to stay involved. Option 3 would be requirement of drugs to be in phase 3 trials for patients to access them. In addition, insurance could offer an end-of-life coverage that patients can decide to use for either palliative intervention or clinical trial drugs. Although the FDA oversight would be bypassed, this would ensure that safety and efficacy of the drug was known, as well as potential adverse effects. This would prevent drug companies from releasing a plethora of ineffective phase 1 trial drugs to individuals that could be potentially fatal. A negative aspect of this choice would be the inability of the FDA to be involved and provide crucial information to the implementing physician about dosing, side effects, and other pertinent drug information. Another negative aspect would be the limitation of patients to available phase 3 drugs. The end-of-life coverage would prevent financial burden on the patient and prevent pharmaceutical companies from stalling the advancement of a drug due to monetary reasons. I recommend option 3. This would only subtly change the already approved policy by just adding an additional parameter that the trial drug must at least be in phase 3, ensuring its safety and efficacy. This would still eliminate involvement of the FDA, whose approval process commonly deters physicians from applying, despite being revised and shortened. Including patients with terminal illnesses in clinical trials could result in potentially skewed data. This change would not involve these patients in clinical trials, eliminating this. Another recommendation for this process would be palliative care awareness. In addition to confirming the patient's terminal diagnosis, physicians involved with this process should also document proper education of palliative intervention and its benefits, offering this alternative to these individuals first. It is important that the knowledge and understanding of palliative care as an alternative is clear to the patient as they are making a decision to start a trial drug. Making phase 3 trial drugs available to these patients could pose a financial strain on pharmaceutical companies as well as patients. Insurance companies, including an end-of-life coverage that either pays for a palliative involvement or provides coverage for phase 3 trial drugs. Either route the patient decides to take, they would be provided with financial support, preventing financial strain on the pharmaceutical company as well as the patient. In evaluating this policy change, it is important to reassess the criteria included in the initial analysis. These criteria included patient safety and quality of care, cost effectiveness, and public benefit. It is important to follow up with all stakeholders involved regarding all of these criteria and their opinions on the new changes being implemented. Based on their responses to these criteria, it can be determined whether the change was a success or whether the policy needs further analysis.